Welcome to the 2018 Consular Debates. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we were only able to be joined by Reverend Joseph Marx, candidate for consul, as the candidate Christian Newton is unable to join us this evening. We will simply be interviewing Reverend Marx. Good evening, Reverend Marx.
Thank you very much.
Let's go ahead and have your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Greetings. My face is one that may be fairly new to many in the Grand Republic, as is my voice, as I only became a citizen of Delvera a few months ago. However, it is my hope that over the coming months leading up to the vote, through interviews and debates such as this one, that I may develop a rapport and a relationship with the people of Delvera. That you may all come to see the value in the nearly 10 years of experience which I possess, the positive international relationship which I have labored hard to preserve, and the unbridled passion for cultural and economic development with which I have devoted most of my adult life to achieving. Micronationalism is a passion of mine, and through Delvera, I believe we can achieve goals in micronationalism that have only been dreamed of until now. The role of the consul to me is to act as a guiding spirit of the nation, to collaborate with the legislatures to advance Delvera's interests both within and without. I hope that you all will come to see the value in placing me in such a position, where my years of experience, my positive foreign relations work, and my unbridled passion for micronationalism by electing me to be your consul.
Thank you, Reverend Marx. Let's go ahead and dig right in. Can you tell me what is the greatest threat in your mind to Delvera in the foreseeable future, and also what is the greatest asset?
The greatest threat I feel to Delvera in the present is our isolationism. We have the means and the methods to develop our economic and cultural output tremendously fast. However, trade and positive relations will be critical to furthering and expanding upon those goals of ours. It's important that we present a worthwhile image, that we can bring in fresh new blood, that we can bring in people who can one day replace us. I believe the goal of any micronationalist, worth their salt, is to create a society, to create a nation which can last beyond themselves. And to do this, we must be willing to present ourselves in a positive way. We must be willing to promote our image to the wider micronational and international communities.
Speaking to the philosophical ramifications of your response and also the more personal implications, why is micronationalism important to you?
For me, micronationalism represents a unique form of self-determinism. It allows a community to forge their own identity and to create a culture or society where they can feel like they genuinely belong, where they are playing a critical role in its evolution. In the modern age, people are more disconnected from the systems they established for their own representation than at perhaps any other time in our history. In America, we have entered what I sometimes refer to as a second Gilded Age, where wealth and power speak far more than principles do. Micronationalism to me is a form of protest to this mentality, a sense that we can come together under the same enlightened social contracts that, our founding fathers in the United States created and fostered to forge our own identity and to build something that's better than we have now by fostering an internal community which can survive beyond us and grow alongside its populace, which should be the primary goal of any government of Delvera. It is my sincere hope that we can all forge a unique national identity independent of the macronational power that our citizens may otherwise belong to.
What are your intentions regarding our relationship with the United States of America?
The reality of the situation is that Delvera will be connected to the United States, both in its history and in our practical, reasoned protocols and procedures. We are citizens of the United States, all of us. And so we must still be bound by the standards and practices of the United States. However, I do believe that there are cultural expectations that we can build among our own populace. And we can adapt a mindset that works around the limitations of U.S. law. Treating working with and selling and trading within the United States as a form of international economics. Treating U.S. taxes as a tariff, or if necessary, foreign aid, given recent developments in the American government. I feel that the best way to treat the United States is as an entity that we are both a part of and seeking to become self-reliant against, to distinguish ourselves from it.
Speaking to distinguishing relationships, what sort of alliances, if any, are you looking for Delvera to forge? What nations do you currently consider to be on friendly terms with Delvera, and where do you see those relationships going?
At the present, I feel, especially as the Minister of State, that Delvera finds itself in a severe and crippling isolation from the rest of the micronational community. As the minister, I've often found myself stifled by current protocols and expectations of micronational diplomacy. Many of those protocols I myself helped to establish. And after a great deal of consideration, I've come to the conclusion that our current means of diplomacy, a reliance on treaties of recognition, is truly ill-suited to the current political climate. Such systems were established in the age of chat rooms and wiki talk pages, when immediate communication was impossible and face-to-face time chat was either unsafe or unregulated. In the age of live streaming and video chat, this very debate is symbolic of the change our community is undergoing. Such treaties are slow and they often lead to diplomatic stagnation. I thus propose that we abandon the current treaty method of diplomacy in favor of creating a diplomatic corps of ambassadors, whose jobs are consistent and continual communication with the nations of their respective regions. We would obviously have ambassadors who would routinely speak with the Empire of Carnia-Ruthenia, who is, I think, our strongest and most devoted ally. They are the one entity, I believe, who has the greatest potential to grow and expand alongside us and to survive long past its creators. And we should try to foster that and help to support them in that endeavor. And having this core would assist in that. I would also suggest a reasonable reintegration with the MicroWiki community, using this core of ambassadors, having a singular ambassador that acts as the primary entity through which all communication with Delvera. The community is not a friendly situation. It is not a friendly environment. But there are members of that community that could come to the benefit of Delvera, so long as we are willing to foster those relationships. And so long as we allow ourselves to have a voice in that environment, we have a say in that narrative. We should also invite ambassadors and politicians from friendly nations to witness our processes and participate in our cultural holidays and celebrations. Establish tourism boards to motivate and work with our local communities to bring interested non-micronational entities and citizens into our view. And we should allow our friends to bear witness to the glory of Delvera and gauge the opportunities which underlie continued friendship with us. In this way, I believe we can truly foster positive relations, inspire economic and cultural development in their nations, and build lasting trade partners, which we will desperately need if our economy is to grow.
Reverend Marx, speaking to the geographically closest micronations to Delvera, where do you see our relationship with Carnea Ruthenia specifically, and also the more geographically close Frischstein and Dewaco estates? Where do you see those relationships in particular going, both the relationships we are closest to diplomatically and also geographically? And what are some distinctions between those two categories?
A natural problem with micronationalism is distance and an inability to truly engage in a physical person-to-person contact. I've had a professional relationship with the Emperor of the Confederation for almost 10 years now, and we've never met face-to-face or person-to-person. And so these are situations that with Carnea Ruthenia will continue into the future. I do not believe there will be a situation, at least in the foreseeable future, where the Emperor of Carnea Ruthenia and the Consul of Delvera could meet together to discuss trade or other such situations. But in the age of Skype and live communication, I don't believe that's necessarily such a critical piece of diplomacy anymore. But it does have marketing advantages. And this is where I think Dewaco estates and Frischstein do come into advantage. Them being geographically closer to us, it becomes more reasonable and possible for us to establish events where the representatives of their nations could be invited to attend events that we host or attend events that they host, to create this in-person communication, to truly create a sense of interconnectivity that we need if we really want to expand our nation beyond the screen, to really show that the Delvera exists beyond the screen, which for many prospective citizens will be a limiting factor.
Thank you. Switching gears for a moment, speaking to the economy, what steps, if any, will you take to improve the circulation and use of the Kiro?
This is an area that I'm truly excited for. With the establishment of the Kiro designs, Delvera has already completed the first step on a long road to long-term economic stability. The major hurdle I feel we now face is convincing our populace to utilize this new currency in the face of a far easier alternative being more widely available, that being the US dollar. How do we convince our citizens to make use of this new currency beyond stating how it has tangible value? Because it might have tangible value, it might be a fiat currency, but find me somewhere that accepts raw copper as payment. The only real way I see is to develop our primary and secondary economic sectors. I thus propose that we create a commission to research various primary raw material sectors, including agriculture through the use of community gardens and local farmers markets, and the creation of a plastic recycling industry modeled on the perfect plastic machinery method. As for the secondary and industrial sectors, the current administration has been happy to allow private enterprise to hold near sole responsibility on this front. However, I feel that there is a role for the Delveran government, as the most sustainable and established economic entity in our nation at present, to invest not only in businesses, employing what I call a pragmatic capitalism, but also in people. We need to establish a national marketplace, perhaps a website, where citizens can meet and gather to engage in business and exchange currency for goods and services. We should also develop our culture, and the best way to motivate citizens to create vestiges of culture, music, literature, art, etc., is through the use of grants and potential cash awards. We could establish a Delveran lottery to motivate citizens to participate in an enjoyable periodic event where the opportunity of winning is necessitated on chance, and participating in the national space, while at the same time granting additional capital for the nation to invest in other economic areas. We also need to ensure that the local governments have the means to meaningfully collect and enforce taxes and keep the flow of capital moving through the nation so that no one industry or individual can begin to accumulate too much of our current money supply, because that will just stagnate our economy. So, by supplying our citizens with the goods and the means to exchange those goods, by motivating citizen participation in cultural processes through grants, and by investing through microcredit transactions in people and potential entrepreneurs, even potentially non-micronational trading partners, we can foster an economic climate that could grow to improve the entire community's economic output, which naturally would create future markets for Delveran products.
Speaking specifically to foreign markets, how specifically would your administration promote industry abroad? How would you pitch Delvera's and your ideas to the intermicronational community?
The situation for many micronations is that they simply lack capital. They lack the hard monies necessary to properly invest in an industry. And many of them who do choose to invest in industries such as Uberstadt do promote only a single sector. Usually, for Uberstadt's example, they promote very heavily in agriculture, but they also don't have a currency economy. They have a much more socialized industry, and that works for them, but it does not really work very well for future economic growth. At least that's how I feel. And I feel that a great way that we can work is to support and develop trading deals and investment opportunities, such as foreign aid, that could be used to foster international industries as well. And specifically, trying to make sure that we find motivated people who want to create industries, who want to create businesses, or even if they don't want to participate in the micronation itself, are willing to do business with the micronation, are willing to accept the Kiro as a viable form of currency, because that is what will determine the viability of the Kiro as a long-standing currency, is people's accepting of it. Yes, it may have hard value, but it is only when people choose to use it as a medium of exchange that its value will be vindicated.
Thank you. On the subject of immigration, how will you go about attracting immigrants to Delvera?
My campaign has a heavy focus on economic and cultural development, and such evolution of Delveran society naturally requires a healthy and established immigration policy, which can bring in motivated and skilled people. A key need for our nation is to present ourselves with a warm and inviting presence in the international community. We need to utilize our voice in the global space through social media to promote Delveran interests abroad, stand up for those values we as a nation hold dear, and isolate ourselves from those who might employ similar iconography to our nation to promote values which are counter to our own. We must make sure that there is no mistake in prospective citizens' mind as to where we stand and to who we desire to associate with. This does not mean that we need to get involved in every political squabble or condemn every foolish group, but those who have the power to take action have the responsibility to. And our nation will attract people who see us stand for our values in both word and deed, not act as if we are above the issues of our times. To develop a positive media image, I might also suggest the creation of a national media network in the style of the British Broadcasting Company, or BBC, to promote Delveran media interests and provide a worthwhile competitive platform under which other private media entities could arise. We must work to foster an inviting environment through my diplomatic and economic reforms where opportunities are plenty and where an individual's personal ability to affect change in their society becomes more visible. That will excite people to want to become a part of us, to want to join in, and to feel like they will truly belong.
Thank you. Speaking specifically to immigrants, and the process by which they become citizens. Is there a screening process that you have in mind, or is there a specific demographic that you would encourage or possibly discourage from immigrating into Delvera?
I feel that there are some people who desire or they look at micronations and they see them as an opportunity of aggressive protest or as a means to rub the nose of established authorities. And I don't think that that's the right mindset to be going into with a micronation. Our effort is to create a new culture, not to destroy the current one or to upend a current one. Delvera's aims should be to promote Delveran interests. And I think that if we can find people who have a desire to participate in a group larger than themselves, or have the ability to see how their advancement can come from advancing the community that they belong to, that we will have a much more reliable, much more motivated, and far more friendly community. And that's important to foster, because the more welcoming of an environment we can create, the more stable of a democracy we can create, which will only extend our strengths into the future.
Reverend Marx, can you speak to how your administration will address non-territorial citizens, that is, citizens who are not in a province?
As a non-territorial citizen myself, there is a desperate desire to make sure that they are included in the community itself, that they feel that they belong to the Delveran culture. A lot of the current Delveran culture seems very motivated or very designed around Lavradia or Neosho Rapids, and they are the oldest provinces, so naturally that is to be expected. But non-territorial citizens, which many of our new prospective citizens will probably belong to, should feel like they are included. So we need to start establishing local communities, perhaps dividing up the non-territories into regional areas of influence where people can feel they belong. Smaller communities within Delvera that perhaps aren't provinces, but could act in a way almost like townships, that could send representatives that maybe might have a vote, but can speak on behalf of a township or on behalf of a regional community. So even non-territorial areas can feel as though they are creating a culture amongst themselves, which can perhaps eventually evolve into provinces in their own right.
On the subject of law enforcement, are confederal law enforcement agents a viable option in your administration? There's been a lot of talk in the current administration, in the cabinet, and among the citizens of having confederal law enforcement agents enforcing the law. What is your perspective and opinion on that?
As we develop our economic and cultural presence within our citizens' lives, I think it is absolutely necessary to establish the protocols and laws to protect their dignities and to ensure a degree of equity in the economic and social arena. Competition, which is necessary for a thriving capitalist economy, requires a degree of reasonable regulation, pricing, wages, quality controls. To enforce such policies is difficult under micronationalism whilst protecting the privacy and rights of our citizens. I would thus suggest that any law enforcement agency we create will require the trust of the people to protect their interests. We will necessarily lack the show of force that macronational law enforcement utilizes. We must therefore, I feel, create an agency where citizens feel they can go to express their concerns or disapproval with practices, where they can give their indication that they feel something is outside of the expected rules or established quota. And thus with the approval of the legislature, this agency could thus have the powers granted to investigate any unscrupulous or illegal activities and to charge and punish accordingly, under the expected punishments that would be established by our government. It would necessarily have to rely on a trust with our people and a subservience to the legislature, an absolute subservience to our legislature.
Reverend Marx, an idea that has been floating around in the public forum, and I mean that literally and metaphorically. I've seen it in chat rooms. I've participated in the conversation myself. Somewhat of a tongue-in-cheek, a humorous question for you. What is your position on criminal memery as a punishable offense?
I feel that it's entirely a situational circumstance. In the privacy of a situation where, in areas where business is being discussed, we should treat a level of dignity should be going on. A level of professionalism should be held. We are attempting to advance the lives and well-beings of our citizens, and thus we should behave in an expectant and reasonable manner. However, I also believe that there should be a level of humor. We should allow a level of comedy and good nature to exist within our forums, to prevent us from becoming stiff, rigid, or easily insulted. Sometimes we do just need to laugh at ourselves. And I think the situation ultimately comes down to, as far as memery goes, what is respectful, what is dignified, or what is intended to insult. If it is intended to demean or demoralize an issue, or to treat an issue as if it were not important when it's presented in a professional manner, I believe that to be derogatory and harmful to the politics overall, and should be punished. But if it's a situation that's intended to bring a source of brevity in a tense time, as a means to, engage in more cordial relations, that I feel is more harmless. Ultimately, it's I'll know it when I see it kind of attitude, and it's a situation that we do need to kind of address. As we become more visible to the public, our professionalism will need to be more well established. And as we develop our culture, especially our political culture, our political behavior will become more rigid as well. I feel that that's a necessary evolution to our political landscape.
Final topic of the evening, the military. What is the function and purpose of the Delveran military, in your opinion?
The military, to me, represents a singularly unique cultural entity within the Grand Republic. It stands as a symbol of our personal pride and an assurance of our own self-determinism. While it does effectively exist as a defensive force, in reality, I feel it functions far more as a cultural tool to promote the Delveran image and confidence in her citizenry, as well as an entity which could be made readily available for emergency services and foreign aid. Utilizing this, I feel, will be a critical element in any effective Delveran government, and fostering a positive image of Delvera. I have images in my head of Delveran soldiers being, volunteering to assist in emergency supplies, in organizing charity events, in going to areas where emergencies are occurring in the United States or elsewhere, and are able to assist and help. And in so doing, not only aid people, but also promote the image of Delvera as a positive force in our world. And that will do far more to help us than I think perhaps anything else, because our military is and should be composed of our best citizens. And we should use them as our means to put our best foot forward as an entity which promotes the best of Delvera.
So, in that line of thinking, what changes, if any, would you like to see made to the structure of the DAS, of the Delveran Armed Services?
I would like to see more. Having military exercises is important, and having that structure and organization is definitely important, and we need to make sure that we continue to evolve that. I think over time we need to start creating almost not transitioning, but creating training and exercises in survivalist skills, in organizations, and the establishment of, as I said, promoting and organizing charity events through the military. The use of the military more as an organization which can be used to assist or aid, almost as a nonprofit organization, as it were, to promote Delveran interests abroad. And of course, it would also serve the function of being our militia to defend us in times of military or social struggle.
What is possibly the most controversial subject within micronationalism, if not micronationalism itself, is the subject of micronational war. I am sure that there are, in 100 people, there are 100 different opinions that vary greatly, more or less. What are your thoughts on the subject of micronational war, let's say from a realistic standpoint?
This is a subject that has been in debate since I entered the community in 2008. Back then, the possibilities of war were mostly harsh words. They really tended to be far more just a breakdown in communication. Sometimes they extended in more serious terms into cyber warfare, at which point they were actually scarily effective at wiping some nations right out of existence. So there are definitely, when people say that micronational war is foolish, I think those people seriously doubt the capabilities of some nations to engage in aggressive action. However, there is a level of practicality that I think physical contact will not necessarily always be possible. I think a way that conflict and war is a necessary entity in politics. It exists as an unfortunate consequence of people's inability to always be diplomatic. That there is always a breakdown in diplomacy. Diplomacy must always resume, but only once the causes or the motivations which prevented that diplomacy become so horrifying that diplomacy becomes the best alternative once again. And I feel that war, whilst I have always fought against it, and I have always tried my best in my career to act as an arbiter for military conflicts whenever they occurred, that has not stopped me from engaging in defensive or promoting defensive campaigns. And I feel that that is the way we must present warfare. Warfare will inherently have to change. It will have to establish, I feel, perhaps older styles of warfare. In ancient times, wars were generally fought with two sides would agree to meet on a battlefield and engage in an activity. Perhaps we could learn from the Iroquois nations and employ a sport to determine military conflicts. The Iroquois and other Native American tribes used lacrosse to prevent games of lacrosse where the winners would get whatever was being debated over as a means to prevent violence, because violence will not and should never be employed by a micronation. We are at the whim of our macronational communities, whether we like it or not, and violence will be the one point where their eagerness to just leave us alone will disappear entirely.
Thank you. Speaking to your position in Delvera currently, I will have to say we looked high and low to find at least one good hardball question for each of the candidates, and this is what we came up with for this round. The reorganization of the NAC has been ongoing since 2015, and correct me if I'm wrong there, under your direction, more or less, and has thus far been, in the minds of many, mostly unsuccessful. How will your consular administration handle things differently? Will Delvera suffer the same fate as the NAC? Why or why not? Give us some specifics on that.
My administration, with regards to the Confederation, was beset at the beginning by protocols and standards that were started 5 years before when the Confederation was started. We came in with a great deal of baggage, and we were kind of rebuilding the nation from the ground up. Delvera has been established and stayed fairly well motivated with a strong populace of people who are already planted in and ready to be motivated. When the Confederation got started, we sort of had to find people again. And we were able to find a great deal of people, but over time we just didn't have the economics. We didn't have the social structure. We had the history, we had the culture, but we didn't have the motivation, the structures in place, the infrastructure to effectively feel as if the government could move forward, could not be transitionary, that the idea of me stepping down wouldn't immediately result in the government collapsing again. And I was not comfortable in calling an end to any transitionary government under such means. And as far as with integration with Delvera was concerned, I wanted to make sure that the government of the Confederation was strong and established, or at least had citizens who were willing to participate, or that we had a system that allowed them to easily participate before we joined in with Delvera. Because that would create, that could result in even more of any problems that existed in the Confederation extending into Delvera, which I did not want. Now, as far as Delvera is concerned, all those problems that the Confederation had, Delvera doesn't. It has a large, motivated populace. People who want to participate, who want to do these amazing activities, who want to do things to advance Delveran interests. It has the infrastructure. It has the protocols of laws. It has an established legislature. It's had an effective transition of power from one leader to another and an effective government therein. It has an economy that's not only just off the ground, but rising. The Confederation has elements that could develop into an economy, but it never got there. There was never enough motivation in its current form, in its current transitionary form, to feel as if it were stable. There are upcoming plans within my administration as the Prime Minister to finalize and to once and for all end the transitionary period, and to create a government that I feel can be integrated into Delvera effectively, efficiently, and without my guiding hand.
Reverend Marx, the final question of the evening, and then I would invite you to make your closing remarks. Have you begun the process of choosing your cabinet? Are there any names that you feel comfortable mentioning tonight, or have you just simply not made any firm decisions yet as a campaign?
I have not made any firm decisions as a campaign. I have not yet spoken with my campaign manager about any specific ideas that he may suggest. I have been looking at various citizens. I have been considering the talents and skills and especially the passions of the various citizens within our nation. The reality of the situation is that based upon our population, there will be many people within the current administration who will continue on into mine. However, I feel that there is a way in which we can ensure that the people with the passions for new projects, for new ideas, can be brought in where I feel, based on my experience with them, where they can do the most good, where they can advance Delvera in the best means. But I am not, at this current time, prepared to name any names.
Thank you. Any closing remarks?
Yes. It is my hope that tonight's debate or interview has given all of you out there a confidence in my campaign. Coming into this election, I was afraid that as an unknown and honestly a politically divisive and distinct individual for many of the former political leaders of Delvera, that I would be unwelcome. But I believe a nation must be reflective of all of its citizens. And my election, I believe, will send a message to the rest of the world of our democratic forwardness. My passion for micronationalism, my sincere devotion to the principles of rationalism and pragmatism, and this unbridled enthusiasm for the opportunities which now lie before us, thanks to the efforts of past administrations, it gives me an immense confidence in the future of Delvera. And regardless of the outcome of this election, I will labor for that future as the consul or as president. It doesn't matter to me as much in working towards that goal. But all the same, I do hope that you will all vote for me to lead you into that future.
Reverend Marx, thank you and good luck.
Thank you very much.